Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering draft video. It's Al here with you. This is How to Draft MTG, and today we're looking at Modern Horizons 3, which releases on Arena today. Hope you're excited. I am too. This is going to be a draft overview video geared towards folks who haven't quite checked out the format yet. Maybe you're a little bit newer to drafting. Maybe you're newer to drafting a supplemental set like this, but you've drafted a few sets before. These are my broad strokes, ideas, and impressions of the format and things that I'm going to be thinking about going into my first few drafts of Modern Horizons 3. As always, please click like, click subscribe if you like the content I'm making here. It helps a huge amount. Leave your comments in the comments below. Questions, concerns, props, anything like that that you want to type below really does help as well. And with that, let's get right into it. And here we are. We are going to be doing this podcast style, as Modern Horizons 3 is an enormously complicated set with way too many mechanics to go over in a video like this. And it's going to be hard to say, here are exactly the decks you're supposed to draft, here are exactly the cards that go in those decks, here's exactly how good everything's going to be. This is going to be a lot more of a broad strokes thing, like I said. So I've got my 17lands.com tier list open here, and the first broad strokes idea I want to give to you is draft your deck like you're drafting a theme deck. And what do I mean by that? A theme deck, for example, if we're looking at Rush of Inspiration here, which is an energy card. It gives you 2 energy, you draw 2 cards, and then discard a card unless you pay those 2 energies. And energy is a counter, it's a resource that you accrue. It's one of the main themes of this set. If you're in energy, I want most of the cards in your deck to give energy, use energy, care about energy in some way, or work with energy in some way. So very important to load up on as much of one theme as you can in your deck building, especially early on in the format when we don't know a ton about what the best cards are yet. And also read what your cards do and see if you can find any cool interactions with the sort of main theme that you're drafting. Another example might be the black-green +1/+1 counter theme. Whoops, excuse me. Have as many cards as possible in your deck that give +1/+1 counters, get +1/+1 counters, double +1/+1 counters, say +1/+1 counter on them. And I think if you go down this route, you're going to end up with a synergistic deck that's focused and able to compete. And the place you don't want to be in is sort of in a bunch of different, your hands in a bunch of different pies at once with not a super clear direction. And I think that's going to leave you sort of floundering in your gameplay. So how do we get there? Well, we start with flexible cards that fit into many different possible decks, and then narrow in on which themes are available to us as the draft progresses. So with your first pick, you're going to take your rare, of course, if it looks good, if it's worth money, if you need it for your deck, all that kind of stuff. And then right after that, we're going to be looking at the cards that I have graded B, B+, or B-. And these are flexible and powerful cards that are going to fit into many different archetypes. So let's have a look at what those are. Starting with white, we've got Glyph Elemental, 1 and a white for a 2/2. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So just at its baseline, it's going to grow with the game. It's going to outscale a lot of your opponent's creatures pretty quickly. They're going to have to deal with it very soon, especially if you get to play it on turn 2. And it's also got the bestow option, 1 and a white. It can be played as an aura on a creature you control, granting it its abilities, and then if that creature dies or gets bounced or something, this just lands back on the battlefield as a creature. Also in white, we have Proud Pack Rhino, 2 and white for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you can choose to put a shield counter on a permanent, which if it would be dealt damage or destroyed, the shield counter gets removed instead, or you could choose to proliferate. Choose any number of permanents and or players, give each another counter of 1 of each kind that's already there. So if you have a couple of creatures with +1/+1 counters, now they get an extra one. So 3 mana 3/3 with a relevant enters the battlefield ability. I think that is a B-level card. It's going to fit into a lot of decks for you. Thraben Charm is our last one here. 1 and a white for an instant. deals damage equal to twice the number of creatures you control to target creature. So if you got a couple of creatures in play, this is a 2-mana deal 4 at instant speed or better. Obviously, if you don't have any creatures, this card's really bad, but I mean, if you don't have any creatures, you're probably losing anyways. So I would put this in the B category. You're going to want to play this pretty much in any deck that's playing white. It also has a couple of other modes on it: exiling an enchantment, exiling a graveyard. Sorry, destroying an enchantment, exiling a graveyard. Probably won't be doing those very much, but just as a creature removal spell, I like this one quite a bit. In blue, we have Hope Ender Coatl, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer with flash. And when you cast this spell, counter target spell an opponent controls unless they pay 1. So late in the game, this isn't going to do a heck of a lot for you. 3 mana 2/2 flyer is still pretty good, though. If there's a board stall, this could win you the game. But if you're playing this on curve, like on turn 3, on turn 4, countering your opponent's 3 or 4 drop, and getting a 2/2 flyer out of the deal, this is extremely powerful. So the ceiling on this, I think, is high enough, and the floor is high enough, and it's flexible enough that I think it just kind of fits anywhere, and I would pick it quite highly. It also has Devoid, which means it has no color, which comes up occasionally, but isn't all that important. Emrakul's Messenger, our next blue card, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 flying. Really good stats already. It's also got Devoid, so it has no color. And when you draw your second card each turn, you get a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token that can sacrifice to make a colorless mana. So just a 2-mana 2/1 flying is pretty much good any point in the game, especially on turn 2, and then occasionally getting a little extra resource is really good. And then if you're in the deck that really cares about this, of course, it's even better. We also have Depth Defiler, 3 blue for a 3/5 with Devoid. It's got Kicker of a colorless mana. We'll talk more about this in a second, but when you see this colorless mana symbol, it has to come from a source that makes only colorless mana. It's not like the number 3 in this mana cost, which can be paid with anything. This has to be paid with specifically colorless mana, so that's going to be from an Eldrazi spawn token or from a land that only makes colorless. Now, even if you're not kicking this, it's pretty good. It's a 3/5 that returns a creature to its owner's hand when it comes down, or lets you draw 2 and discard 1. So I think this is just really good value. And then, of course, if you can kick it, it's absurd. So I think you're happy taking this early and playing it in any blue deck. Serum Visionary, similar kind of deal here. It's 2 and a blue for a 2/2. Enters the battlefield, draw a card, and scry 2. These are just all good pieces of text on a Magic card, and I think this card goes in any deck. In black, Fell the Profane. This is 2 black for an instant. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. Love doing that. And it can also be played as a land that produces black mana and it comes into play tapped. But if you want it to come in untapped, you can pay 3 life. So kind of a semi-low opportunity cost here, as this can replace a land slot in your deck if you don't have a lot of 1-mana creatures. And then in the sort of, if you're in a pinch and you need a land, you can play this as a land. You can pay 3 life, and you don't want to do that too many times, but doing it once, maybe twice in a game isn't going to, kill you. And of course, missing your land drop probably will kill you. So, yeah, I like these cards a good amount. If the front side is a desirable effect at a good mana cost, I think these are really, really good. And then the ones that are sort of less interesting on the front, I don't know that you really want to put them in, because you don't want to be paying 3 life for your lands all that often. But this one, I like it a lot. We also have Wormcoil Larva, 3 black for a 3/3 Death Touch lifelink. When it dies, you get a 1/2 artifact creature token with Death Touch and a 2/1 artifact creature token with lifelink. So a 3/3 that dies into 2 things. Just a lot of rate for 5 mana, and it does a lot of great things for your artifacts deck too if you're in that deck. You'll notice I'm skipping over a lot of these build-arounds and synergy cards, and that's because they don't fit into any deck in particular, so I would not necessarily be taking those early. Marionette Apprentice is next. This is, I'll scroll down just a little bit here. This is 1 and a black for a 1/2 with Fabricate 1, which means it can enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it as a 2/3, or it can create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So most of the time, I think you're going to be playing this as a 2-mana 1/2 that brings a 1/1 along with it, which on turn 2 is really good. Later in the game can sort of be a great blocker, and it's got a really nice ability here. Whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So this can create a lot of situations where, if your opponent attacks you and you block with 4 or 5 little token creatures that you have, they could be dead just from that, or dead on the swing back. If you have ways to sacrifice your creatures, this type of ability can really get out of hand, and just the fact that this is 2 bodies for 2 mana is really, really powerful. Also, the +1/+1 counter thing is going to come up from time to time as well, as there's a deck that cares about that. And finally, in black, we got Wither and Bloom. This is 1 in a black for an instant. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. And you can pay 1 in a black and exile it from your graveyard to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. You can activate that as a sorcery. So just a lot of rate here, a lot of utility. 2 mana, kills a small to medium-sized creature, and then, boosts a creature of your own. And if you care about +1/+1 counters, you like it even more. Going to red. Spawn Gang Commander. This is 3 red for a 2/2 with Devoid. When you cast it, you get 3 Eldrazi spawn tokens. And you can pay 1 and a colorless mana, sacrifice an Eldrazi, any Eldrazi, not just the spawns, but most likely the spawns. It'll deal 2 damage to any target. So again, you need to pay this colorless mana with a spawn token or with a land that creates colorless. But the very fact that it's giving you 4 bodies for 5 mana is a huge deal. If you need to use a spawn to sacrifice, to make the mana, to sacrifice another spawn, that's still pretty good. It's a 2/2 that dealt 2 and left you with another spawn. If you're using these spawn tokens as ramp to cast a giant thing, then that's also really, really good. So there's just a lot of flexibility here. I think this is a really powerful card, and I think all red decks are going to be happy to have it. Galvanic Discharge, single red for an instant. You choose target creature or planeswalker. You get 3 energy counters, and then you may pay any amount of energy to deal that much damage to the creature or planeswalker you chose. So at a baseline, this is single red, deal 3 at instant speed, which is extraordinarily good. And if you're in the energy deck, maybe it's even more because you've got some extra energy lying around, or maybe you only need to deal 2, so you get to keep that 3rd energy and use it towards something else in your energy deck. But in any old deck, one that doesn't even necessarily care about energy, single red, deal 3 instant speed is a premium card, and you can take it early and be happy with it. We've also got Fanged Flames. This is 1 and a red for a sorcery with Devoid, which will actually matter some of the time. There's a couple cards that have hexproof from colors and stuff like that. So this being colorless is actually kind of useful. And it deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker and exiles it if it dies. So 2 mana, deal 4. This is about 1 mana cheaper than we usually see these for in limited. It is sorcery, but I think it's a really good rate and super flexible. So I'll be taking these early. We also have Pinnacle Monk. It's another double-faced card. It's a 3 red for a 2/2 with prowess, and when it enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, and that can be played as a tapped red land, or you can pay 3 life to make it untapped. So again, just like really low opportunity cost here. The body's not great, but bringing back a Fanged Flames or a Galvanic Discharge or something like that and getting to use it again is a big advantage. And I mean, if you can cast a couple of spells, this is all of a sudden a 4/4. And that can really mess your opponents up as well. So I like this one a lot. Skittering Precursor is next. 2 and a red for a 3/3 with Devoid. It also has Menace. Whenever you sacrifice a non-token permanent, create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn token. So 3 mana, 3/3 Menace is just a good rate. It's going to attack really well. And then on occasion, you're going to get an extra resource. Or if you really build around this, you're going to get a lot of extra resources. And that's quite nice. Reiterating Bolt. This is 1 and a red for a sorcery. Deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you can replicate it by paying 3 energy. So if you pay 3 energy, you get to do it again. Now, the decks that don't play energy, I think, are still going to be happy about this. 2 mana, deal 3. It's not as good as Fanged Flames. It's not as good as Galvanic Discharge, but I mean, 2 mana, deal 3 is still pretty darn good. And of course, if you're building around it, it's quite absurd to getting to do this twice. Or I mean, if you could pull it off 3 times, I'd love to see a screenshot of that. Would be, very, very powerful. Reckless Pyro Surfer, as I scroll down a little bit here. 1 and a red for a 2/2 haste. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gains Battle Cry until end of turn, which means when it attacks, all your other attacking creatures get +1/+0. So if you've got, I don't know, a bunch of spawn tokens lying around, even now they're attacking as 1/1s, and that could really throw your opponent's math off if they sort of let their shields down thinking, oh, those spawn tokens aren't going to do anything. All of a sudden they're getting hit for like 5 damage, from your 2/2 and a couple of spawns. That's pretty darn powerful. 2-mana 2/2 haste on curve is very good. So I think this is just above the line of a card I would want to take early and fits in any deck. Ral and the Implicit Maze is our last red B-level card. 3 red for a Saga. Basically, Saga is sort of, I'll just read the card. As the Saga enters the battlefield and after you draw, let me start that again. As this Saga enters and after your draw step, I can't do it, guys. Add a lore counter. Sacrifice after you add the 3rd lore counter. So kind of every turn, it's playing out its next chapter, and these are the chapters. The first one is that it deals 2 damage to each creature and each planeswalker your opponents control. So I would think a lot of the time this is going to be able to kill at least a couple of things. It's going to wipe out all their spawn tokens if they're doing that. This is pretty good for 3 red, and then it does even more than that on your next turn. You may discard a card. If you do exile the top 2 cards of your library, you may play them till the end of your next turn. So not even this turn that this chapter is happening, but the following turn you can still play those. If they're lands, you can play them, which is really nice. Obviously, if they're spells, you can cast them. And on the 3rd turn, you get a 2/2 weird token. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So if you wait to play those cards out of exile, maybe this could be a 3/3 or a 4/4. So just a ton of value for 5 mana. And I think that's kind of just a really powerful card that you're going to want to take early. Bridgeworks Battles, our first green B-level card. This is 2 and a green for a sorcery. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn and fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Usually we pay 4 mana for this, and it's only +1/+1, if I recall correctly. So this is already a pushed rate, and you get the buyout of it being a land if you need that in a pinch, and you can pay 3 life to make it an untapped land. Territory Color, 4 and a green for a 7/5 with Devoid. It's got reach, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature, you may reveal it and put it in your hand, and if you don't put the card in your hand, you may put it in your graveyard. So you don't want to draw lands for the rest of the game, no problem, just put them in the bin. Well, I guess you're playing lands, so you don't, well, you know what I mean. But if you don't want them, put them in the bin, and this will help get you to your creatures more quickly. All right. Signature Slam, 2 and a green instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then each modified creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So a lot of words there. So a modified creature is a creature with an equipment, an aura, or a counter on it. So at the baseline, this is 3 mana. Put a +1/+1 counter on your creature, and it deals damage to a different creature. That's very good, especially at instant speed. There'll be situations where you could block. Say you've got a 3/3, they attack you with 2 3/3s. You block their 3/3, play this, eat it, and punch their other 3/3, and that's a nice 2-for-1 for you right there. And then if you've got additional creatures with modifications on them, you can kill something really big. That won't come up all that often, I don't think. So just as a baseline, I think this is just a really good early pick. Path of Annihilation, 3 and a green for an enchantment with Devoid. When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 spawn tokens that can, and it gives Eldrazi you control the ability of adding 1 mana of any color if you tap them. So this'll, maybe this is more of a build around, but I have it as just good kind of anywhere. I think a lot of the green decks are going to want to produce a bunch of mana, and this will help you do that. So, 4 mana for 2 additional ramp pieces, albeit they're kind of fragile, but I think this is quite powerful. And then when you cast a creature spell with mana value 7 or greater, you gain 4 life, so it can help stabilize you as well. So maybe not literally every green deck's going to want this, but I think many of them will. Propagator Drone, 1 and a green for a 2/2 with Devoid. Creature tokens you control have evolve, which means if a bigger thing than them enters the battlefield, they get a +1/+1 counter. And it also has the ability 3 and a green to create an Eldrazi spawn creature token. So a 2-mana 2/2, it's good on turn 2, and then this ability late in the game to just make endless spawn tokens is really good, and sort of pumps up your other spawn creatures. I guess any creature. Well, no, creature tokens, so just your spawn creatures. But yeah, I think it's powerful enough that you take it early. It does ask a little bit of you, but at its baseline, it's still quite good. Horrific Assault, single green for a sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. If you have an Eldrazi, you gain 3 life. So that could just be a spawn token, right? So a lot of the time, this is 1 mana, kill a thing, gain 3 life, which is kind of busted, actually. There's a card called Lightning Helix that does that. Not exactly that, but essentially that, and it costs red and a white. So, yeah, I like Horrific Assault quite a bit. Eldrazi Repurposer, as I scroll into view here. 2 and a green for a 3/3 with Devoid. When you cast this spell, and when this dies, you get a spawn token. So it's 3 mana for a 3/3 that makes a spawn right off the bat, and then when it dies, it makes another spawn. Just ton of cardboard, as the pros like to say. Ton of pieces of cardboard for one spell here, and that's always desirable. And these make mana. You don't have to be in the Eldrazi deck. Like just getting 2 extra kind of lotus petal little mana creatures on the battlefield. Lotus petal, that's such a boomer term. 2 little colorless treasure tokens. How about that? Is a huge game. So love that one. All right, and getting into multicolor here. So these I think are mostly going to be the double-faced ones. They're a land on the backside that taps for 2 colors of mana. And basically if the front side is desirable, then I have these as quite high picks. They're very flexible as well. So we'll look at this one here. Stomp. This costs 1 and then a hybrid red-green. So these mana costs always confuse me when I look at them. I'm like, okay, is it red and green? No, it's red or green. So it actually fits in twice as many decks. You could just play this in a straight, red deck or red-black deck, red-white deck, whatever. It doesn't even touch green. It doesn't matter. You can still play this. And then the backside allows you to splash a green card if you want to play it as a land. The text on the card is target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. So another just removal spell, 2 mana. It's not a fight, so your creature's not at as much a risk of dying, and being able to be a tap land on the backside is really, really good. You would generally pick these tap dual lands if that's all they were tap dual lands. You would pick these as C pluses at least. So, given that it's both things, I think it's a really high pick. Rush of Inspiration, we looked at a little bit earlier. This is 1 blue-red hybrid for an instant. Draw 2 cards, then discard a card at random unless you pay 2 energy. And sorry, I think at the beginning I said this gives you 2 energy at the very beginning of the show, and that's not correct. You have to have energy for this to work, but even if it doesn't work, it's still not bad. Like I think you play it as the land most of the time, but as a buyout, as it being a spell later on, that's not bad. And of course, if you have energy, it's very good. So early pick, mostly for the land side, but still really good. Same with this one here, Revitalizing Repast. It's a hybrid black-green. As an instant, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, gains indestructible until end of turn. So nice little trick here. Can save your creature from removal, can eat something in combat, or it's a dual land, and it helps you splash and fix your mana. Really good. Glasswing Grace, 3 black-white hybrid, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has flying and lifelink. So 5 mana is a lot, and auras are risky, as we know. Your creature can get killed out from under it, and then you sort of get 2 for 1 there. But if this sticks on a creature, this is a huge swing. And of course, it's also a dual land, taps for black and white. Drowner of Truth, another double-faced card here. It's a tap land that makes green or blue, or it's a big creature that costs 5 and green-blue hybrid, 7 mana total for a 7/6. When you cast it, if a colorless mana was spent to cast it, you get 2 spawns. Even if it wasn't, 7 mana, 7/6, that is oftentimes a dual land for you, is really good. Blood-Soaked Insight, 5 black-red hybrid, so 7 mana, big spell again here. Costs 1 less to cast for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. I'm not sure how I feel about that text, because if you're dealing them a lot of damage, you're probably winning already, but maybe you could discount this by a couple. Target opponent exiles the top 3 cards of their library. Until end of your next turn, you may play those cards. If you cast a spell this way, mana of any type can be spent to cast it, and it's a black-red tap land on the other side. So another one that you're probably just playing as the land most of the time, but occasionally this is going to pull you way ahead and win you the game, so why not? All right, a non-double-faced card here, Titan's Vanguard. This is the red-green signpost uncommon. This is 3 red-green for a 5/5 with the Void. When you cast a spell, and whenever it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on each colorless creature you control. which includes itself, because it does have Devoid, so it is colorless. So it's a 6/6 trample for 5 the first time it attacks, and that's good enough to make it into my deck. I don't know about you. And then, of course, if you've got spawn tokens, things are really getting out of hand. So you can see where that build is going from there. We have Pyretic Rebirth, a red-black. Uncommon, it's an instant. Return target artifact or creature from your graveyard to your hand, and it deals damage equal to that card's mana value to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. So you're going to be able to engineer situations where you're getting something back from your graveyard and killing something. That's very good for 4 mana. It's also an instant, which is a big advantage as well. On to Not Masters, the white-black signpost uncommon, 2 white-black for a 2/2 with lifelink. Whenever another modified creature you control dies, put 2 1/1 counters on it. It's got an adventure, throw a line. Adventure is an ability where you can sort of cast it as a spell and then later cast it as a creature side. So the adventure here, throw a line for white-black, distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures. So we can see what we're aiming for here. You've got a couple creatures in play, you make them bigger, and you play this on the next turn. You start getting into combat, this can become a 6/6 or even bigger, depending on how many modified creatures you have and how often they're dying. Cursed Wombat, green-black for a 2/3. It has Adapt 2, so you can pay 2, a black and a green, 4 total, to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. You can only do that if it doesn't have any +1/+1 counters on it to begin with. So 2 mana, 2/3, you can pay 4 to make it a 4/5, and then it has permanents you control have whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on this permanent, put an additional 1 on it. It triggers only once each turn. So in fact, this is a 2/3, and you can pay 4 to make it a 5/6. So just a lot of stats. And this is why I'm happy to take all these cards early. They're just really good rates, and they're going to kind of work anywhere. And then, of course, you can juice them up by building around them, as we talked about before. Waterscape Battle Mage is our last multicolor here. 1 and a colorless mana with kicker of a green and or 1 and a blue. When you cast this spell, if it was kicked with its green kicker, exile target artifact or enchantment. Not going to come up all that often, but certainly some of the time. And then when you cast a spell, if it was kicked with its 1 and a blue kicker, return target creature to its owner's hand. So you do have to do a little bit of work for this one. Like I said, you got to make sure you got a spawn token or a land to test for colorless, which we're going to talk about in a second. But I think this is a really good rate, and certainly if you're doing both kickers, you're really getting away with something. On the colorless side here, Eldrazi Ravager, 5 and a colorless mana. It's a 6/6 with Annihilator 1. You can sacrifice 2 Eldrazi, so they could be little spawn tokens or something that you don't really want. Return this from your graveyard to your hand, and it's got cycling for 2, so you can pay 2, discard it to draw a card. So early in the game, cycle this away, don't worry about it. Later in the game, if you got a couple spawns laying around that you don't need, sacrifice them, bring it back to your hand, and now you've got a 6/6 with Annihilator 1, which I didn't explain what that does. Whenever this creature attacks, defending player sacrifices 1 permanent, and Annihilator can be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. This one is 1. So again, a little bit of work needs to be done here. Make sure you have a colorless source. But I think this is good rate and really easy enough to build around that you just kind of want to put this pretty much anywhere. The lowest to the ground, most aggressive decks don't want this, but any sort of mid-range deck, or certainly a deck that cares about ramping, is going to want this card. Okay, so those are our B-level cards. We're trying to take those early, leave ourselves open, and start to look at, especially picks like 7, 8, and then, of course, the wheel when the pack comes around again, picks 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Look for which themes are available here. Which themes are people not drafting? And that's where we want to sort of start to focus our deck so that we can, make sure that we end up with a really focused theme-like deck like we talked about. So what are those themes? All right, blue-white, our first theme deck here. It's the energy deck. Emissary of Soulfire is the signpost uncommon. 1 white-blue for a 1/4. When it enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy counters. You can pay 2 energy counters to put an exalted counter on target creature you control as a sorcery. And exalted means whenever a creature you control attacks alone, any creature, not necessarily one with exalted, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each instance of exalted among permanents you control. Kind of complicated. Read this one a few times and you'll sort of get the hang of it, but you could have 3 or 4 exalted counters around your creatures, and then all of a sudden one of them attacks, it gets +4/+4. And that becomes really difficult for your opponents to deal with. So it looks like blue-white's obviously cares a lot about energy. It's a bit more controlling, a bit more of a long game deck. You're going to be looking for ways to get energy on the cheap and early in the game. So something like Tune the Narrative, single blue instant, draw a card, get 2 energy. It's going to be really important to a deck like this. Tempest Harvester, 1 and a blue, 2/1, gives you 2 energy, and then you can pay an energy and tap it to loot. Really, really good. Something like Inspired Inventor, 2 and a white for a 2/2, gives you 3 energy, or puts a counter on a creature, or makes a servo token. Just a flexible card, but 3 energy is big, right? So we want ways to generate lots of energy, and then we can use that to activate our payoffs. Keep in mind that something like Proliferate, here's Metastatic Evangel, 1 and a white for a 3/1. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you proliferate. That can give you extra energy counters. So if you have any amount of energy counters, you can get an additional one every time you proliferate. And also keep in mind that something like Distinguished Conjurer here could be really useful to a deck like this. This is 1 and a white for a 1/2. When another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. But most importantly, you can pay 4 and a white, tap it to exile another target creature you control, and then return it to the battlefield. So you could use this alongside your Inspired Inventor to repeatedly generate that 3 energy and fuel your big payoffs. So blue-white looks cool, doesn't look super powerful to me, looks a little bit clunky, but again, it's so early, it's hard to tell what decks are going to be the most powerful. So draft it, and just make sure you draft a lot of cards that give energy. All right, next we'll look at white-black modified. This is the Signpost Uncommon we already looked at here. On Do Not Master, 4 mana 2/2. When another modified creature you control dies, it gets 2 1/1 counters. It's got the Adventure, give a couple 1/1 counters to your creatures. It's got lifelink. So white-black cares about modified creatures. Keep in mind, modified means it's got a counter on it of any kind, or an aura, or an equipment. Okay, so looking for cards that maybe are auras, like Nyxborn Unicorn here. It's 1 and a white for a 2/2 with Mentor, but it can be played as an aura with Bestow for 3 and a white. Now it's giving a creature +2/+2 in Mentor. Now that creature's modified. Beauty of Bestow, of course, is when the creature dies, or if it gets killed out from under it or whatever, you still end up with this 2/2 creature. So a great way to modify your creature without taking a huge amount of risk on yourself. Same with Indebted Spirit, 1 mana 1/1, Afterlife 1. It's got Bestow for 2 and a white. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. Afterlife 1. So 2 really, really good ways to modify. Now, also something like Airy Auxiliary is going to be really important for this deck. 3 and a white for a 3/3 flying, and it supports 2 when it enters the battlefield, which means it puts a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 other target creatures. So just looking for really efficient, good ways to modify your other creatures and reap the benefits of that. Also, something cool is like a card like Mindless Conscription here is going to count as well. So Mindless Conscription says it's an enchantment for 2 and a black when it enters the battlefield, and whenever you draw your 3rd card each turn, you amass Zombies 3, which means you get this 0/0 zombie token with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. So you didn't do anything to modify it, but it comes modified already because it's got +1/+1 counters on it. So just be aware of kind of look for interactions like that as well, and those are going to fit very well in this deck. So even if you never draw 3 cards in a turn, the 3 mana 3/3 that is itself just modified is good for a deck like this. I'll just quickly mention Obstinate Gargoyle as well. 1 black white for a 2/2, has flying as long as it's modified, and it's got Persist. So when it dies, if it didn't have a -1/-1 counter on it, it comes back with a -1/-1 counter on it. I'm not sure how good this is going to be, but worth noting that if you put a +1/+1 counter on this while it has a -1 counter on it, they cancel each other out, and then when it dies, it'll come back again. So there'll be ways to continually persist this, and of course, if you can put counters and aura and stuff on it, it does get flying as well. And I didn't mention the blue Signpost common. Each color pair does have a common as well. I just don't think it's all that super exciting, but it's blue-white for a 2/2 flyer. It's good, but it's just not super good. It gives you 3 energy, and when you attack, you can pay 2 energy. Target creature gains lifelink until end of turn. So Certainly like a solid card, good on curve, just not super exciting in my opinion. Okay, moving forward to red white, signpost uncommon, Scurry of Gremlins, 2 red white for an enchantment. Enters the battlefield, you get 2 1/1s, and then you get an amount of energy equal to the number of creatures you control. So at a baseline, you get 2 1/1s and 2 energies. Hopefully you have some more creatures out, so you get a bunch more energy. Pay 4 energy, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. So you can set up a big surprise attack with this card. So red white looking to be a go wide aggressive deck that uses energy. The signpost common Conduit Goblin, red white for a 2/2, gives you 2 energy. At the beginning of combat, you can pay 1 energy, and another target creature gains +1/+0 and gains haste. So between these 2 cards, you can have a lot of hasty attackers. Want to try to make multiple bodies where we can. So again, a card like Inspired Inventor can give us energy if we need it, can give us an extra body with the servo if we need it. This is going to be an important card. Again, Area Auxiliary, pumping up our tokens is really quite nice. The red removal spell that we mentioned, the B level card here, Galvanic Discharge, giving 3 energy, paying extra energy to deal extra damage. These are all things that we're going to be wanting to do with this deck. It doesn't look like it's super well supported, but I think these red-white decks tend to just be pretty solid. So if you see good red and white cards going around, get into it, give it a try, and draft lots of energy cards. All right, next is white-green. This is sort of another modified +1/+1 counter equipment aura type deck. Golden Tail Trainers, the signpost uncommon, 1 green white for a 1/3. Or an equipment spells you cast cost X less to cast, where X is its power. When it attacks other modified creatures you control, get +X until end of turn, where X is equal to its power. Golden Tail Trainers power, to be exact. So we want to modify this and all of our other stuff and get reap the benefits of that. So we also have Faithful Watchdog, which is similar to the zombie card that we talked about earlier. It's a green-white for a 0/0 vigilance, but it comes with 3 +1/+1 counters, so just a nice support piece here. It comes in modified. It's a good stat line. Some other payoffs, stuff like Hydra Trainer, 1 green for a 1/1. It can exert as it attacks, which means it won't untap on your next turn. And target creature gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of counters on permanents you control. You can adapt it to put 2 counters on itself. Other good cards with adapt, Temperamental Oozewag, 3 and a green for a 4/4 with adapt 2. Modified creatures you control have trample. So just lots of sort of stuff like this. Just keep your eyes open for it. Again, I'll sing the praises of Area Auxiliary, putting counters on your creatures. Inspired Inventor can put a counter on itself. Even something like Wing It. This is a nice little combat trick we haven't talked about yet. 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and then it gets a flying counter, and you scry 1. So that flying is going to stay on it for the rest of the game, and it's also modified because it now has a counter on it. So all of these types of things add to modified. So keep that in mind. Draft lots of those if you're drafting white-green. Alrighty, next is blue-black. The side post uncommon here is Horrid Shadow Spinner, 1 blue-black for a 2/3 with lifelink. And when it attacks, you may draw cards equal to its power. If you do, discard that many cards. And blue-black is all about drawing 3 or more cards in your turn. Keep in mind that, of course, your draw step is the first one, so you only need to draw 2 additional. So this Horrid Shadow Spinner kind of does it by itself, although it's probably going to get blocked and die, so you better get some good rewards from drawing those 2 cards. And then, of course, you got to discard as well. So I'm not super excited about blue-black as a deck, but again, like, draft towards the theme, see if it's good. It might be. It just doesn't look that great to me right out of the gate here. We also have Sneaky Snacker at common, blue-black for 2/1 flying. When you draw your 3rd card in a turn, you can return this from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Not a great payoff, again, just getting back a 2/1 flyer later in the game, but I guess you are drawing 3 cards or whatever, so that's, you're already doing really well. So yeah, you're looking for ways to draw a bunch of cards. So there's big flashy ways to do it, like Brain Surge, 2 and a blue to draw 4, and then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library. There's Deep Analysis, which is a really great way to do it as well. 3 and a blue for a sorcery to draw 2, so that would be your 2nd and 3rd draws. You can flash it back for 1 and a blue and 3 life as well. So if you're doing stuff like looting or conniving, which also count towards your draw, you can get this into your graveyard and cast it for just 2 mana. So yes, please keep in mind that something like Scurryless Sentry here, 3 and a black for 2/3 menace that can connive, counts towards that draw. So whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, it connives, which means you draw a card, then discard a card. If you discarded a non-land card, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So this is kind of playing two sides here. It does the modified thing as well. Yeah, that draw brings you one closer to that that threshold of 3. There's also stuff like, sorry, I'm just going to find it here. Copy Crook has a connive ability as well, and there was Tempest Harvester, which we already talked about, the 2-mana 2/1 that you can tap, pay an energy, draw a card, discard a card. So even if you're not heavily invested in energy, you could do this twice and maybe set up a turn. This deck's going to be all about putting the pieces in place to set up a turn where you do hit that magic number 3 and a bunch of things happen all at the same time. So it's a little bit of a Rube Goldberg machine, and that's why I'm not super high on it power level wise. I think it'll be super fun to play, and I mean, maybe it'll be good. So I'll certainly try to draft it if it's open, and just pay attention to all these effects and how they fit together. Alrighty, next is blue-red energy. Signpost uncommon here. Is it Generatorium? Blue-red for an artifact. If you would get 1 or more energy counters, you get that many +1 instead. Then you can tap it to draw a card if you've paid or lost 4 or more energy this turn. So blue-red, all about energy and all about spells, as blue-red typically is. The blue-red spell side of things, we've got at common 1 blue-red for a 2/2. This is Cyclops Superconductor. 1 blue-red for a 2/2 with prowess, and it enters the battlefield, gives you 3 energy. When it dies, you can pay 3 energy. When you do, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So, again, a deck that I'm not super excited about just because the uncommon doesn't really do anything when it hits the board, and then this Signpost uncommon is just a little understated here. 3 mana for a 2/2 is kind of rough. But yeah, in blue-red, of course, you're going to be looking for lots of cheap ways to get energy very quickly. So singing the praises of Tune the Narrative again. Single blue, draw a card, get 2 energy. Tempest Harvester, 2-mana 2/1, get 2 energy and can loot. The red removal spell, which I can't remember the name of. Single red, get 3 energy, deal 3 to something. Something like Thriving Skyclaw is going to do really well in a deck like this. 2 red for a 3/2 with flying. It gives you 3 energy, and when it attacks, you can pay 3 energy to put a 1/1 counter on it. So by itself, it's attacking as a 4/3 flyer for 4, which is quite good, and then it can continue to grow from there. So this deck's going to be pretty tricky to build, and I would expect that it won't perform super well right off the hop, but really good players are probably going to break it somehow. So again, if it's open, I think anything in this set is going to be worth trying to draft and see if it's good, but I also do want to give you my honest opinion about the decks that I think are going to be a little bit weaker, and red-blue is one of them. All right, next is blue-green Eldrazi. This is a deck that I do think is going to be pretty good. Planar Genesis is the signpost uncommon. Blue-green for an instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a land from among them onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't, you can put a card from among them into your hand and the rest on the bottom. So not super strong effect, but a nice little ramp piece. And if you don't need ramp, then you can dig for a big threat to play. We've also got Chrysalis, Snapping Voidcraw. 1 green-blue for a 1/3 with Devoid. It's an Eldrazi. It taps to add 2 colorless mana. And as we talked about before, it's very important that it's specifically colorless mana for casting some of the Eldrazi spells. You can pay 3 in a colorless and tap it to draw a card. So blue and green, all about ramping out giant Eldrazi creatures. And I think the support is really here for these to work quite well. So let's take a second to talk about the... here we go. Talk about the colorless lands for a second here. So I think there's a cycle of 10 of these, and I'll just read this one here. Tranquil Landscape. It's a land. Taps for a colorless mana. You can tap and sacrifice it to search for a basic forest, plains, or island. Put it on the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle. And you can cycle it for those colors as well. If you pay green, white, blue, and discard it, you get to draw a card. So there's 1 of these for each 3-color combination. And I think that the ones that tap or search for green and blue specifically, so Tranquil Landscape, Foreboding Landscape, and Bountiful Landscape are going to be sort of the highest priority. And then green-red is also on the big mana Eldrazi theme a little bit as well. So Twisted Landscape and Sheltering Landscape are going to be desirable as well. The other one's not as much, but I think they're still going to be quite good. So this entire cycle of lands, if there's nothing super interesting for you to take in the pack, I would just take one of these. It'll help you splash, and it'll also help you cast Eldrazi spells should you end up with some. So blue-green, all about ramping it out. Looking for ways to make Eldrazi spawn tokens. So we already talked about Eldrazi Repurposer, the 3-mana 3/3 that comes with a spawn and dies into a spawn. There's some other nice little ramp pieces here. Nightshade Dryad, 1 and a green for a 1/2 death touch that taps for a colorless or a mana of any color. There's a blue ramp creature as well, Sage of the Unknowable, 1 and a blue for an 0/4 that taps for colorless. It can only cast colorless spells. But remember that the devoid cards, even if they have colored mana in their casting cost, if they're devoid, they will count as colorless, and you could cast them with Sage of the Unknowable. So I want to just cast really giant things. Wumpus Aberration here. It's a 3 and a green for a 6/6, and if you didn't spend specifically colorless mana, the opponent gets to put a creature into play from their hand, so please make sure you do that. But of course, if you do, 6/6 trample for 4 is quite nice. There's Twisted Riddle Keeper in blue. It's an 8 mana 5/5 flying, and when you cast this spell, tap up to 2 target permanents, put a stun counter on each of them. Has the ability Emerge. This is I'm not sure how many cards in the set have this, but I'll read it out here because this is a cool interaction. It has Emerge for 5, a blue, and a colorless, so a total of 7. You may cast this spell by sacrificing a creature and then paying the Emerge cost reduced by that creature's mana value. So 7 total here. If you sacrifice a 4-mana creature, you're only paying 3 for this Riddle Keeper, and I won't be the first person to have discovered this, but there's a card that I'm just trying to find here called Reef Worm. It's 3 and a blue for a 0/1 that dies into a 3/3, and then that 3/3 dies into a 6/6, and that 6/6 dies into a 9/9. Really cool looking card here. Of course, it's a 4-mana 0/1, so you need to find a way to kill it probably on your own. Your opponent's not going to attack into it or whatever, so it's a great Emerge piece. So look out for little combinations like that as well, in addition to just the standard make mana, cast big thing. Now, the weakness of a deck like this tends to be, I drew all my mana producers, but I didn't draw my big creature to cast. Or I drew all my big creatures, but I didn't draw any mana producers, so I couldn't cast any of them. So look out for cards like this one here, Warped Tusker, 7 mana, 6/8 reach. When you cast or cycle it, you get a spawn token, but you could cycle it for 2 and a green. So in the early game, you could cycle it away for 2 and a green, get a spawn token to help you ramp, draw a card. And in the late game, of course, it's your 7 mana 6/8. Look for cards that are good early, good late, like that. Other things like mana sinks, like this Colossal Dread Mask, 4 green for a living weapon equipment, which means it comes kind of with a little germ creature token attached to it. So it's essentially a 6 mana 6/6, and then once that creature token is gone, you can equip it to something else for 3 green. So having ways to spend all this mana after the fact is also really important as well. So blue-green looking pretty cool to me. I'll be looking forward to trying to draft that one. All right, Black-Red Artifacts is next. We already looked at the signpost here. Pyretic Rebirth, 2 Black-Red. Return an artifact or creature from graveyard to hand. Deals damage equal to that mana value to target creature or planeswalker. Not necessarily a real signpost, but this deck cares about lots of artifacts, and we'll see that with Cranial Ram here. Black-Red for a living weapon equipment. Equipped creature gets +X+1, where X is the number of artifacts you control. So on its base, it's +1/+1. Of course, we want it to be a whole lot more than that. So this is a deck that just wants to play as many artifacts as possible. Look for stuff like Furnace Hellkite here. It says 5 red for a 5/5 flying that can pump itself. It's got affinity for artifacts, which means it costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. So you got 3 or 4 artifacts in play, then all of a sudden this is costing 3 mana. That's going to be pretty devastating for your opponent. Wormcoil Larva is an artifact, generates a couple of artifacts on death. Just looking for sort of things like that. We also have Ethereum Terramander here. So 1 mana, 1/1 flying in black. It can block only creatures with flying, and it can adapt 4 for 7 mana, but it costs 1 less to control for each, or it costs 1 less to activate this ability for each other artifact you control. So again, you got 4 artifacts in play. This counts as 1 itself. Then it can adapt 4 for 3 mana. It's really powerful. So I'm excited about this deck. I think it's going to be pretty good, but you need a ton of artifacts to make it work. Another good one here, Frogmere Enforcer, 7 mana 4/4 with affinity for artifacts, or it could be a 4 mana 2/2 with the same ability. Look for cheap artifacts. You really want to have a 1-drop in a deck like this on turn 1. So Refurbished Familiar, another affinity card, 4-mana 2/1 flyer. When it comes in, the opponent discards a card, or you draw a card if they can't. Yeah, really important to have 1-drop creatures that are also artifacts. So Sarpadian Simulacrum, single red for a 1/1 haste. You can pay 3 and a red and sacrifice to deal 4 damage to target creature. This is just a really good card, but it's also an artifact. So getting this down on turn 1 now makes all of your affinity stuff cheaper, and pumps up your cranial. It's not cranial plating. I know it's not cranial plating. I can't remember the name of it. Cranial something. Cranial ram. There it is. I'm too old. I remember the old cards that these are based on. Retrofitted Transmorgant, single black for a 1/1. Artifact creature zombie can come back from the dead. So you really want to have access to these, and like even in a pinch, you're gonna play something like Inventor's Axe, single red equipment, gives +2/+0. You have to pay energy to equip it. First one's free though, so I guess actually the second one's free too. Maybe this isn't that bad, but it's not a creature, so you don't want to have too many of these effects. But you really in this deck will almost play anything that says artifact and costs 1 mana. So just be aware of that. You need a ton of artifacts, but I think the deck will be powerful if you get those. All right, next is black-green, +1/+1 counters. We already looked at the Signpost Uncommon here. Black-green for a 2/3, pay 4 mana to adapt 2, and it gives extra 1/1 counters when creatures get 1/1 counters. Cursed Wombat is the name of it. And the common, Signpost Common, Expanding Ooze, 1 black-green for a 3/3, has adapt 1 for a black and a green. When it attacks, put a 1/1 counter on target modified creature you control. So black-green just generally kind of caring about modified, but a little bit more on the +1/+1 counters side of things. So just looking for stuff that has +1/+1 counters on it naturally. So we already talked about Mindless Corruption. That's the card I was looking for. 2 and a black enchantment. Makes a zombie token with 3/1 counters on it. Stuff with adapt. Temperamental Oozewag, 4 mana 4/4 with adapt 2. Keep in mind that Proliferate can help out here as well. So if you happen to be splashing white for Proud Pack Rhino, for example, 3 mana 3/3 enters the battlefield. Proliferate, you're going to get some extra value there as well. And any sort of fight spells, I know we talked about, it was a Signature Slam. There it is. 2 and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. Something kind of innocuous like that is going to get pumped up super well in an archetype like this one. All right, and finally we've got red-green Eldrazi Ramp. We already talked about the Signpost Uncommon. I'll just pull this up one more time. Titan's Vanguard, 3 red-green for a 5/5 with the Void. When you cast it or when it attacks, you put a 1/1 counter on each colorless creature you control. It's got Trample, and the common is really quite nice. Writhing Chrysalis, 2 red-green for a 2/3. When you cast it, you get 2 spawn tokens. It's got Reach, and whenever you sacrifice another Eldrazi, most likely a spawn token, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So we're looking for ways to make a bunch of spawn tokens. A good way of doing that might be Basking Brood Scale here. 1 and a green for a 2/2 with the Void. It has adapt 1, and when a +1/+1 counter is put on it, you make a spawn token. We already talked about Eldrazi Repurposer. 3 mana 3/3 makes a spawn when it comes in, makes one when it dies. In red, we've got some nice options here as well. Glimpse the Impossible is a really nice one. 2 and a red for a sorcery. Exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn, and then at the end of the turn, you get a spawn token for each one you didn't play. So this is another example of a good early, good late situation, just like we were talking about in green-blue, where if you need 3 spawn tokens, you can get them on turn 3. And then late in the game, when you have a bunch of mana, this can dig you into some action. So yeah, red-green looking pretty solid to me, and I'm excited to try to draft it. All right, and the last broad strokes thought I want to leave you with is draft a good curve. Prioritize cheap cards, especially 2 mana cards, also 1 mana cards, 3 mana cards. Don't end up with a deck that's got like a ton of 5 and 6 mana cards, unless of course you're in green blue and you've got those cheaper 2-mana cards that can ramp you into the bigger spells. Okay, that's the biggest trap you can fall into in a set like this, of just ending up with like, oh, my deck's got 5 4-drops and 3 5-drops and 3 2-drops and 2 3-drops. It's like you're going to be in big trouble. So if you don't know what to take out of the pack, take the cheaper card. That's always been such a great heuristic to follow. And then, yeah, build your mana base responsibly. Try to stick to 2 colors. If you're going to splash, make sure you've got one of those fetch lands that we talked about. And try to only play, 1 basic land of your splash color. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks so much for watching and listening. If you enjoyed this, again, please click like, please click subscribe. Let me know if you enjoyed the longer form sort of podcast style video. And best of luck in your drafts. We'll talk to you very soon. Bye for now.